The day Vex'tor discovered humanity's darkest secret began like any other on intergalactic diplomatic research station Alpha 9. 4 tentacles wrapped around his morning cup of heated nutrient solution, 2 eyes focused on his data terminal, and his third eye wandering lazily toward the viewport overlooking Earth. Vex'tor considered himself something of an expert on humans. After all, he'd been studying them for nearly 6 standard cycles, which was practically a lifetime in research terms. Humans were fascinating creatures, warlike but creative, destructive yet oddly sentimental. But most importantly, they were the newest members of the Galactic Confederation, and everyone was a bit nervous about them. Which is precisely why Vex'tor nearly spilled his nutrient solution when he stumbled across the file. Computer. What does this designation mean? Vex'tor's translator unit converted his clicks and whistles into standard human English. File designation, acceptable collateral, refers to classified human military documentation regarding civilian casualties and environmental impact during armed conflict. The computer replied in its irritatingly calm voice. Vex'tor's skin shifted to a pale lavender, the Qua-Axian equivalent of turning ghost white. His research authorization had accidentally given him access to a trove of human military files, and what he was seeing was disturbing. Computer, display content summary of acceptable collateral files. The display flickered, and Vex'tor's 3 eyes widened in horror as he read, projected casualties, 6.2 million. Environmental impact, Class IV extinction event, timeline, immediate. Status, acceptable. Vex'tor's respiratory sacs nearly collapsed. The humans were planning genocide on a planetary scale, and they had labeled it as acceptable. Even worse, there were thousands of these files, dating back centuries, documenting similar events all across Earth and beyond. What kind of monsters had the Confederation just welcomed into their midst? Officer Jenkins, do you have a moment? Vex'tor tried to keep his voice steady as he approached the human liaison in the station's common area. Jenkins looked up from her coffee, a strange brown stimulant humans seemed to require for basic functioning. Sure thing, Vex. What's up? Vex'tor had always liked Jenkins. She had a straightforward manner that was refreshing compared to the flowery diplomatic speech most station personnel used. Plus, she'd taken the time to learn how to pronounce his name without the translator. He hoped his trust wasn't misplaced. Like you knew, Midi, for you. I've discovered something concerning in the human archives. He lowered his voice. Something about acceptable collateral. Jenkins froze mid-sip. Where did you see that? At the military archives. My research clearance apparently granted me access. I was hoping you could explain. Not here, Jenkins interrupted, glancing around. Meet me in Research Lab 7 in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes felt like an eternity as Vex'tor's imagination ran wild with horrifying scenarios. When he finally arrived at the lab, Jenkins was already there, looking uncharacteristically serious. What exactly did you see, Vex? She asked without preamble. Vex'tor described the files, watching as Jenkins's expression morphed from concern to, was that confusion? I need to understand human military history better. Vex'tor continued. Your species has had numerous conflicts, yes? World wars? Cold wars? Brush wars? Jenkins nodded. We've had our share of violence, yes. And the casualties, millions dead in single campaigns. Entire civilizations wiped out. Environmental devastation labeled as acceptable. Jenkins, I need to know, is this still your policy? Jenkins sighed. It's complicated, Vex. War is never simple. And those files. Because I've been correlating data. Vex'tor continued, pulling up charts on the lab's display. Every major human conflict follows this pattern. There's large-scale devastation, labeled as acceptable collateral, and now you're in space with us. Vex, I think you're misinterpreting. Am I? Because Admiral Harkness arrives tomorrow for the Security Council meeting, and the agenda includes contingency planning for non-terrestrial scenarios. That sounds ominously like planning for interspecies conflict to me. Jenkins's face paled. How do you know about that meeting? That's classified level 8. I'm a researcher, Jenkins. Finding information is what I do. Vex'tor's skin had darkened to a deep purple of righteous indignation. The question is, what are you planning to do to us? Jenkins opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I need to make some calls. As she hurried out, Vex'tor immediately contacted the Quo-Axian delegation. By evening, representatives from 6 species were huddled in his quarters, reviewing the evidence with expressions ranging from concern to outright terror. They label extinction events as acceptable, hissed K-Rith, the Mantidean ambassador. These humans are more dangerous than we thought. We should pull out of the Confederation agreement immediately, chirped Zul, the diminutive Pix representative. No, Vex'tor said firmly. We need more information. Admiral Harkness arrives tomorrow. Perhaps we can confront the humans directly at the Security Council. What none of them noticed was the station's AI quietly logging their conversation and forwarding it to human security protocols. By morning, the station was buzzing with rumors. The Arcturian delegation had packed their belongings overnight. The Plex ambassador refused to use the same air recycling system as the humans. 2 Mantidean security officers had been spotted checking their ship's weapon systems strictly against station protocol. Vex'tor watched the chaos with a growing sense of dread. This wasn't what he'd intended. He'd only wanted answers, not a diplomatic incident. But the evidence was damning, and Admiral Harkness's arrival wasn't helping matters. The Admiral was exactly what aliens feared humans might be: tall, imposing, with a perpetual scowl and a chest full of medals presumably awarded for various acts of violence. His first action upon arriving was to call an immediate closed-door meeting with human military personnel, which only fueled speculation. They're planning something, K-Rith insisted when they gathered again. My sources say Harkness brought sealed orders directly from Earth Command. Did your sources happen to mention what those orders contained? Vex'tor asked dryly. No, but one of the human lieutenants was overheard saying, and I quote, "If this goes sideways, it could mean the end of everything." The room erupted in alarmed chittering and whistling. Order, please. Vex'tor clicked loudly. We don't know what that means. It means, rumbled Ambassador Gorn of the Taurians, that we should strike first. Vex'tor's respiratory sacs inflated in shock. Strike? Are you mad? That would prove every human fear about aliens correct. We need dialogue, not violence, says the researcher who discovered their genocidal plans. K-Rith snapped. The time for dialogue is past. The argument might have continued indefinitely if not for the station-wide announcement that cut through their debate. Attention, all diplomatic personnel. An emergency meeting of the Galactic Council has been called for 1,400 hours in the main conference chamber. Attendance is mandatory. Repeat, mandatory for all species representatives. Vex'tor's third eye swiveled to the chronometer. 2 hours until the meeting. Someone leaked our concerns to the Council, he said. Or the humans are ready to reveal their plans, K-Rith suggested ominously. Either way, Vex'tor replied, we'll have our answers soon. As the delegation disbanded to prepare, Jenkins caught Vex'tor in the corridor. What have you done? She demanded, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. There are ships powering up weapons systems, ambassadors demanding emergency evacuations, and Admiral Harkness is furious. I simply shared information from your own archives, Vex'tor replied. If humans don't want others to know about your acceptable collateral, perhaps you shouldn't plan genocide. Jenkins stared at him, mouth agape. Genocide? Is that what you think? She stopped mid-sentence as her communicator buzzed. We'll finish this at the council meeting. Just don't do anything else before then, okay? She hurried away, leaving Vex'tor with a growing suspicion that he might have misunderstood something important. The main conference chamber had never been so tense. Species that normally couldn't stand to be in the same room were clustered together, united in their fear of the humans. Admiral Harkness sat at the human delegation's table, straight-backed and stern, flanked by Jenkins and several officers Vex'tor didn't recognize. Councillor Ziv, a gelatinous being known for their neutrality, called the meeting to order. It has come to the Council's attention that serious accusations have been made regarding human military intentions. Before we proceed, I must ask, who brings these charges formally? Vex'tor felt every eye, ocular sensor, and sensory appendage in the room turned toward him. His skin flushed a deep, embarrassed mauve, but he rose to his feet. I do, High Counselor. In my research, I discovered military files labeled acceptable collateral that detail extinction-level events, planetary devastation, and massive loss of life, all categorized as acceptable by human standards. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. And furthermore, Vex'tor continued, gaining confidence, there are thousands of these files spanning centuries of human history. And now, with Admiral Harkness bringing sealed orders about non-terrestrial scenarios, we have reason to believe humans may be planning similar actions against Confederation species. The murmurs grew louder, more alarmed. These are grave accusations, Councillor Ziv bubbled. Admiral Harkness, how do you respond? The Admiral stood, his face impassive. With all due respect to researcher Vex'tor, his conclusions are based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? K'rith burst out, your own files label genocide as acceptable. They do not. The Admiral stated firmly, if I may explain. Explain 6 million casualties labeled acceptable, shouted someone from the back. The chamber descended into chaos until Councillor Ziv's amplified voice cut through silence. As the room quieted, the Admiral sighed. Permission to access the main display, Councillor? At Ziv's nod, Harkness projected a document onto the giant screen. It was immediately recognizable to Vex'tor as one of the acceptable collateral files, but now he could see the full heading, Fornex J2197B, the collateral damage assessment and acceptability determination. This, Harkness explained, is a standard bureaucratic form. All military actions require a detailed assessment of potential collateral damage, meaning unintended consequences. The designation acceptable doesn't mean we want these consequences. It means the assessment has been reviewed and filed properly according to regulation. A confused silence fell over the chamber. But Vex'tor objected, some of these files describe extinction events. Yes, Jenkins interjected, worst-case scenario planning. We're required to document every possible outcome, no matter how unlikely. It's a paperwork exercise. A paperwork exercise? Vex'tor repeated it incredulously. Welcome, Admiral Harkness said dryly, to the true horror of human military operations, bureaucracy. For the next 30 minutes, Admiral Harkness and Jenkins walked the stunned council through the Byzantine labyrinth of human military bureaucracy. The acceptable collateral files weren't plans for genocide, they were forms. Thousands upon thousands of forms required for every military action, no matter how small. This particular form, Jenkins explained, pointing to the document that had started everything, was a theoretical scenario from our strategic planning division. It's their job to imagine the worst possible outcomes. So the 6 million casualties? Vex'tor asked weakly. A hypothetical scenario that was reviewed, filed, and forgotten until you found it, the Admiral confirmed. The acceptable stamp doesn't mean we find those deaths acceptable. It means the paperwork was filled out correctly. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. But what about the non-terrestrial scenarios? K'rith demanded, unwilling to let go so easily. Admiral Harkness actually laughed. You mean these? He projected another document. These are emergency evacuation procedures in case of station failure. We were bringing them for review by the safety committee. Vex'tor's skin had faded to an embarrassed pale blue. So there's no planned genocide? The only mass extinction humanity is currently planning, Jenkins said with a smile, is the extinction of trees to make enough paper for our fawns. You mean, Ambassador Gorn rumbled in disbelief, that all of this panic was caused by paperwork? I'm afraid so, Admiral Harkness confirmed, though I must say, the irony isn't lost on me. For centuries, our own personnel have complained that our bureaucracy would be the death of us. It seems they were nearly right, just not in the way anyone expected. A Plex representative raised a tiny appendage, But why? Why so much documentation? Jenkins and Harkness exchanged glances. Accountability, Jenkins offered. Humans have done terrible things in our history. These processes evolved to ensure oversight, to make sure decisions aren't made lightly. And to cover our asses, Harkness added bluntly, no one wants to be the one who didn't file the right form when something goes wrong. Vex'tor's third eye blinked rapidly as understanding dawned. So the true horror of humanity isn't your capacity for violence. It's our capacity for bureaucratic obfuscation. Jenkins finished with a grin. The tension in the room finally broke as several species began making their equivalent of laughter. Even Counselor Ziv was vibrating in gelatinous amusement. 3 days later, things had mostly returned to normal on Station Alpha 9. The Arcturians had unpacked, the Plex were back to sharing air recyclers, and the Mantidean weapons had been powered down. Vex'tor sat in the station's lounge, nursing another cup of nutrient solution and trying to forget his embarrassment. "Mind if I join you?" Jenkins asked, appearing with her inevitable coffee. "Please," Vex'tor gestured to the empty seat. "I could use the company. Most of my colleagues are still giving me a wide berth after my misinterpretation." Jenkins chuckled. "If it helps, you're not the first to be confused by our paperwork. Half our own military doesn't understand it either." "I still don't understand how you function with such inefficiency," Vex'tor admitted. "The sheer volume of documentation for even minor actions, it's mind-boggling." "That's humanity for you," Jenkins shrugged. "We've turned bureaucracy into an art form. Some say it's our true superpower. I'm beginning to think they're right. Your enemies must die of old age waiting for approval to be attacked." "That's classified," Jenkins winked. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Vex'tor spoke again. "The Admiral left this morning, yes? Back to Earth?" After filing his post-visitation report in triplicate, Jenkins confirmed. "But he left something for you." She handed over a data chip. "What's this?" Vex'tor asked, suspicious. "Research clearance. The real kind, not the accidental access you had before. The Admiral was impressed by your investigative skills, even if your conclusions were, let's say, enthusiastic." Vex'tor's skin flushed a pleased orange. "Really? There. Really? Though he did say to warn you that looking into human bureaucracy comes with a price." "What price?" Jenkins grinned. "You'll have to fill out the forms acknowledging you've received the clearance. All 37 of them." Vex'tor's pleased orange quickly faded to horrified grey. 37 forms? Just to say I received clearance? "Welcome to humanity's true weapon of mass destruction," Jenkins laughed. "Death by documentation." As word spread through the Galactic Confederation about the true nature of acceptable collateral, an interesting shift occurred. Species that had feared humans for their warlike tendencies now feared them, for an entirely different reason: the possibility that human bureaucratic practices might spread. The Arcturia requested human assistance with their law enforcement procedures, but quickly regretted it when simple arrests began requiring 17 separate forms. The Plex adopted human safety protocols, only to discover their construction projects now took 4 times as long to complete. Even the warlike Taurians, after implementing human-style military documentation, found themselves unable to launch raids because the paperwork wasn't finished. 6 months later, the Confederation convened a special session to discuss what many were calling the human contamination. Representatives argued passionately for containment protocols to prevent the spread of bureaucracy to more vulnerable species. Admiral Harkness, attending as Earth's representative, listened to their concerns with a perfectly straight face before standing to respond. "Distinguished colleagues," he began solemnly, "we understand your concerns and take them very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that we've prepared a comprehensive response plan." He gestured, and a hover drone entered carrying a stack of papers that nearly reached the ceiling. "This is our official response to your concerns, complete with all necessary forms, appendices, and addenda. We'll need each delegation to review, sign, and return all documents in triplicate, of course, before we can proceed to the next phase of discussions." As the collective groan echoed through the chamber, Vex'tor, now the Confederation's official human cultural liaison, leaned over to Jenkins and whispered, "I finally understand why your military labeled extinction as acceptable. After enough paperwork, extinction starts to look like sweet relief." Jenkins just smiled and sipped her coffee. "Humanity, fuck yeah.